setting up a bird feeder transforms an ordinary backyard into a dynamic ecosystem, observation, laboratory. However, most new birdwatchers focus exclusively on what they see, without understanding the underlying ecological patterns. This practical guide addresses the fundamental question every feeder operator asks. Why do different species appear in different seasons? And how do their behaviors reveal their identities? Recent studies from avian behavior researchers indicate that approximately 70% of backyard observers fail to recognize that the same physical location will host different species assemblages throughout the year. Understanding these patterns dramatically improves identification confidence and your ability to predict future visits. American goldfinch, the master of seasonal transformation. American goldfinches create genuine confusion through their dramatic appearance changes. Yet this same transformation teaches a critical identification principle. Behavioral consistency outlasts visual changes. The same male goldfinch presents two completely different visual profiles. Spring and summer reveal brilliant yellow plumage, with black markings immediately recognizable. But that identical bird, viewed in November, becomes olive brown. The transformation is so complete that many beginners believe different species replaced their earlier summer visitors. Here is the identification truth. These birds focus on behavioral patterns. Both versions of the goldfinch share identical feeding preferences. They're obsessed with thistle seed feeders. They maintain the same acrobatic flight style regardless of plumage color. Their preference for hanging inverted while feeding persists through all seasons. Their small size, 5 inches, and energetic movements remain constant. The wing bars, white stripes on dark wings, persist even in drab, winter plumage. This single feature, combined with the feeding behavior and size, provides year-round identification, even when color provides no assistance. Birdwatchers using backyard bird signals observe that females maintain more consistent coloring throughout the year, creating additional complexity. Females in breeding season show more yellow than males might display in winter. This sex-based coloration variation adds another identification layer that rewards close observation. Geographic distribution is extensive, but migration timing varies by region. Northern populations migrate southward, while southern populations remain residents. Understanding your regional population patterns becomes essential for predicting visitor timing. Carolina wren, personality-driven identification. The Carolina wren's vocalizations create the most memorable identification experience. Field ornithologists literally write the bird's call as tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle. Once you hear this phrase during a bird's vocalization, you're permanently bonded to the species identification. This behavioral approach transcends visual identification entirely. Carolina wren's reddish-brown backs with buffy light undersides, combined with striking white eye lines, create recognizable patterns. Yet it is the call that builds identification certainty. Few species offer such distinctive vocalizations. The small size, 5.5 inches, combines with larger personality and bold behavior. These birds readily investigate human activity, approach windows curiously, and demonstrate confidence inappropriate to their modest dimensions. This behavior-first approach to identification captures what birdwatching is fundamentally about: understanding living creatures. Nesting behavior, ready adoption of nest boxes, creates practical engagement opportunities. Installing appropriate cavity nest boxes becomes a management strategy that directly affects backyard bird populations. Wrens and bluebirds become intentional components of your ecosystem, rather than passive visitors. Mourning dove, the overlooked presence. Mourning doves are so common that beginners frequently fail to identify them, overlooking them as unworthy of attention. Yet these birds offer valuable identification lessons. Through their distinctive behavioral and acoustic signatures, the whistling wing sound heard as they take flight provides the quickest identification. This isn't feather arrangement that creates sound. It is the result of specific wing configuration interacting with air. Once you've heard it twice, you'll identify mourning doves acoustically before seeing them. The soft cooing call, described by various regional phrases, becomes another identification tool. In spring, males coo repeatedly, establishing territory through sound, rather than visible territorial displays. Learning these vocalizations builds a comprehensive identification toolkit beyond visual elements. Physically, the brownish-gray coloring with black wing spots matches their ecological preference for ground feeding. The long pointed tail distinguishes them from pigeons despite superficial similarity. At 12 inches, they're large enough to be noticeable once you develop the habit of actively searching for them. Geographically widespread, mourning doves represent generalist species without specialized habitat requirements. This flexibility explains their common occurrence in suburban backyards. Feed patterns show preference for scattered seeds, rather than clinging feeders, behavior that reveals identity through observation. Tufted titmouse, crest display, and dominance behavior. The tufted titmouse's distinguishing feature. The pointed crest on its head reflects the bird's temperament. These small birds punch above their weight class in feeder hierarchies, demonstrating assertive behavior. That contradicts their modest size. Watch how a titmouse approaches competitors at a feeder. Despite being smaller than cardinals and jays, these birds exhibit confident feeding behavior. They readily challenge larger species, suggesting a behavioral confidence linked to their pointed crest. Some researchers theorize the visible crest serves a communication function. Raised crests during confident moments, flattened during submissive periods. The orange flank patches, visible when the bird moves favorably, add identification confirmation. The pale face combined with gray upper portions creates a subtle but reliable pattern. At 6.5 inches, they're slightly larger than chickadees but still small visitors. Geographic range covers eastern United States and Mexico, with populations expanding north. Feeder presence has shifted northern range boundaries, documented through citizen science data. Northern mockingbird, audio deception and adaptation. The identification challenge. It emerges through behavior rather than appearance. These gray birds with white wing patches are distinctive, yet their mimicry creates confusion. Understanding that mockingbirds mimic other birds repeating phrases 3 times is the key. When you hear a cardinal's whistle, search for red, spot-only gray coloring. Realize you've been deceived. You've learned a critical identification principle. Appearance and vocalization must align for confident identification. The range throughout the United States positions these birds as common residents. Their adaptability to human-dominated landscapes demonstrates successful species persistence. The northern cardinal, year-round presence and behavioral consistency. Northern cardinals demonstrate remarkable consistency once they establish themselves in a backyard. They often remain year-round. This reliability creates the perfect species. To begin your observation journey, the vibrant red males are unmistakable. But the muted females reveal something equally important: territorial behavior. Observe cardinals at your feeder. Notice their deliberate, methodical approach. They don't dart in and out like nervous chickadees. Instead, they claim a perch, settle their weight, and feed with confidence. This behavioral signature persists regardless of season. In winter, watch how they maintain position at feeders. Even when snow accumulates, they're hardy birds that don't migrate. The thick, powerful bill suggests seed specialization. Cardinals selectively crack larger seeds that smaller species cannot manage, creating a clear dietary niche. Unlike generalist feeders that demonstrate preference, and this preference becomes your identification tool. Even when plumage details blur in poor lighting, Their vocalizations transform throughout the year. Spring males sing extensively, claiming territory through sound. Autumn and winter communication becomes quieter, though the distinctive metallic chip call remains identifiable. Learning to associate this sound with cardinals builds acoustic identification skills that supplement visual observation. Red-bellied woodpecker, movement patterns, and feeding ecology. Woodpeckers reveal their identity through behavior more effectively than through the subtle plumage details that confuse beginners. The red-bellied woodpecker's characteristic undulating flight, constant up and down dipping while moving forward, becomes your most reliable identification feature. Watch this bird's interaction with your feeder. Woodpeckers approach trees and feeder posts differently than songbirds. They land vertically on wood surfaces, often descending head first, exhibiting climbing abilities unique to this family. They grasp and manipulate items in ways that songbirds cannot replicate. The red on the nape, extending sometimes into the crown, combines with the barred black and white plumage to create an ornate appearance. Yet you'll notice that the subtle red belly patch, the namesake feature, barely appears during typical feeding observations. This teaches the important lesson. Don't depend on a bird's common name to guide identification. Use multiple features. Feeding preferences reveal identity more reliably than appearance. These birds favor specific foods and feeding techniques. They'll visit sunflower seed feeders, but also seek insects in tree bark. In winter, they're attracted to suet feeders, a preference that guides your observation expectations by season. Range expansion northward over recent decades represents a significant ecological shift. Birdwatchers report sightings in regions where this species was absent just 30 years ago. Understanding historical distribution changes prepares you for unexpected encounters. Eastern bluebird, diet-based identification, and conservation impact. Eastern bluebirds demonstrate that identification can incorporate conservation biology and direct ecological participation. These 7-inch birds with 13-inch wingspans show striking sexual dimorphism. Males display brilliant blue and orange coloring, while females present muted versions retaining the color pattern. The reliable identification emerges through diet observation. Eastern bluebirds actively hunt insects and readily accept mealworm feeders, a specific food preference that few other common species share. If you observe a bird hanging around mealworm feeders with interest, Eastern bluebird rises to the top of identification likelihood. Understanding the species' near-extinction experience provides context for modern conservation efforts. Nest box programs and citizen science projects, where homeowners install and monitor standardized nest boxes, directly contributed to eastern bluebird population recovery. Your backyard becomes a conservation participant when you support these birds. Geographic distribution spans across eastern regions, including migration patterns, varying by subspecies and location. Spring arrival signals seasonal transition in ways that engage observers emotionally beyond mere species. Identification. Carolina chickadee social behavior serves as an identification tool. The Carolina chickadee frustrates identification attempts through near-identical appearance to the black-capped chickadee. Yet their social behavior creates clear separation, as Carolina chickadees appear slightly more aggressive at feeders, demonstrating food possession behavior more frequently than their northern cousins. Observe the feeding patterns, as chickadees of both species often grab single seeds and depart. Yet Carolina birds seem more likely to contest feeder access with competitors. This behavioral distinction emerges more reliably than examining microscopic wing feather details, while birds move actively. The vocalizations differ distinctly, and Carolina birds produce a 4-note whistle, often transcribed as chick-a-dee-dee-dee, with subtle pitch variations compared to the black-capped version. Acoustic identification becomes possible after brief exposure, far more practical than visual distinction in field conditions. At slightly under 5 inches, these are tiny visitors that demonstrate surprising personality. They are extremely vocal, communicating extensively throughout the day. The black and white head markings with gray upper surfaces create striking appearance, despite the small size. Watch Carolina chickadees across seasons and notice minimal change. They remain residents year-round, maintaining territories throughout winter. This constancy contrasts with species that migrate seasonally, teaching the principle that different species employ different survival strategies. Blue jays are aggressive competitors in the feeder hierarchy. Blue jays arrive at feeders with obvious physical presence and behavioral drama. Unlike the subtle cardinals, jays announce themselves often loudly. This dramatic behavior, while attention-grabbing, provides excellent identification confirmation for beginners. These intelligent birds demonstrate learning capacity that surprises most observers. They recognize individual humans, remember feeder locations after weeks of absence, and exhibit problem-solving abilities. Watch a jay at your feeder long enough, and you will witness planning behavior. They approach, assess feed availability, select superior seeds, and often carry items away to cache for later consumption. The ornate plumage, blue back, white markings, and black necklace serves a communication function beyond simple camouflage. These colors intensify during breeding season and become slightly muted in fall plumage, though the patterns remain consistent. Size becomes obvious when you watch them bully smaller species away from prime feeding positions. Understand that jays operate on a seasonal rhythm. During breeding season, they become more aggressive and territorial. Fall and winter see increased social tolerance as family groups forage together. Spring behavior shifts again toward confrontation as pairs establish breeding territory. These behavioral changes, completely independent of plumage alterations, create distinct personalities across seasons. Practical management, integrating species knowledge into feeder strategy. Understanding seasonal behavioral changes allows strategic feeder management. Early spring arrival of goldfinches signals shifting seasons more reliably than calendar dates. Increased cardinal vocalizations announce breeding season before environmental indicators appear. Different species require different feeding approaches. Thistle seeds attract goldfinches. Sunflower seeds serve multiple species from cardinals to woodpeckers. Suet provides winter survival support for insect-eating species during seasons when natural food becomes scarce. Mealworm feeders target eastern bluebirds specifically. Temperature fluctuations affect species presence patterns. Winter intensification of feeder usage. Dramatically increased visitor volume during cold periods creates opportunities for observation and identification practice. Some species become resident throughout winter, while others retreat southward. Understanding these patterns builds predictive understanding. Your backyard transitions from a static outdoor space into a dynamic ecological classroom, where seasons reveal their lessons through bird behavior and species arrival patterns. This integration of identification knowledge with ecological understanding transforms casual observation into meaningful participation in the natural world. The birds themselves provide continuous feedback. Incorrect identification leads to incorrect behavioral predictions, and mismatched predictions reveal learning opportunities. This self-correcting system makes backyard birding an infinitely engaging practice that deepens across years of observation.